Look around you for a second. Seriously, take a peek. How many things within arm's reach, or even just in the next room, are connected to the internet? Your smart speaker, maybe a streaming device, a security camera, the thermostat, even kitchen appliances. The Internet of Things, or IoT, isn't some futuristic concept anymore. It's here, now woven into the fabric of our homes, our workplaces, our cities, our entire infrastructure.
Absolutely. And with this explosion of connected devices comes an equally explosive expansion of potential vulnerabilities. Every new device online represents a new door, a new window, potentially left ajar for those with malicious intent. Security isn't just a niche concern for IT departments anymore. It's an absolutely paramount issue impacting everyone involved, from the engineers building these gadgets, the companies deploying them at scale, and critically, you, the individual living surrounded by this connected world.
Exactly. It's not just about convenience or, cool new features. It's about whether we can fundamentally trust these devices and the systems they connect to. Can we trust that our data is safe? Can we trust that our homes or businesses aren't being unwittingly used in an attack? That trust is incredibly fragile in the digital realm.
And that's precisely what our source material for this deep dive grapples with. We've been diving into insightful excerpts from The Future of IoT Security, Building Trust, and our mission today is to pull out the absolute core insights to understand not just that security is important, but why it's such a unique challenge for IoT, how the industry is grappling with building that essential trust.
Right. We're going to unpack everything from the evolving threats these devices face, how security needs to be built in from the initial design phase, the critical challenge of verifying device identities, navigating the minefield of data privacy regulations, staying vigilant with real-time detection and response, and the foundational human element building a culture of security.
And we'll also look ahead, examining promising emerging technologies that could help secure the next wave of connected devices.
So whether you're elbow deep in designing smart systems or just curious about that little blinking box on your router, the goal of this deep dive is to give you the essential knowledge, those key nuggets and actionable insights. Just to feel truly well-informed about the security challenges and solutions in this increasingly connected world. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the problem space. Our source material begins by highlighting the dramatic difference in the threat landscape posed by IoT compared to traditional IT. Why is securing these devices inherently more challenging?
Well, it really comes down to scale and diversity, doesn't it? With traditional IT, you're mostly dealing with PCs, servers, networking gear, relatively powerful devices running complex operating systems, often within controlled environments, and typically managed by, trained IT staff. You have established patching cycles, antivirus firewalls designed for that specific context.
Absolutely. Now compare that to IoT. You have literally billions of devices ranging from powerful industrial controllers down to tiny battery-powered sensors with minimal processing power, maybe just a few kilobytes of memory. They run dozens of different operating systems or maybe no traditional OS at all, using a huge variety of communication protocols. They're deployed everywhere inside homes, out in public, deep inside factories, even implanted in bodies. It's vast.
And many of these devices, especially in the early days, right? They were designed with cost, size, and power consumption as the absolute top priorities, with security being, an afterthought if thought of at all. They might lack basic security features, use default or hard-coded credentials, or have no simple way for a user to update their software when vulnerabilities are found.
Precisely. And this creates an incredibly large and heterogeneous attack surface. An attacker doesn't need to find a sophisticated zero-day exploit for Windows. They might just need to scan for devices using default passwords or known unpatched vulnerabilities from years ago, vulnerabilities that are still present in millions of deployed devices. This leads to certain types of attacks becoming particularly prevalent and effective in the IoT space.
Which brings us to the specific attack types, our source highlights: DDoS, man-in-the-middle, and device hijacking. Let's start with DDoS, distributed denial of service. We often hear about these attacks taking down major websites by flooding them with traffic. How do IoT devices get weaponized for this?
It's a classic case of strength in numbers, but with compromised devices. A DDoS attack aims to overwhelm a target, a website, a server, a network link, with such a volume of traffic that it can no longer handle legitimate requests and becomes unavailable. Attackers achieve this by building botnets, which are networks of compromised computers, or, increasingly, IoT devices.
Okay, so they infect a large number of devices and then control them remotely. Is that the idea?
Exactly. They exploit vulnerabilities. Default passwords are a huge culprit here. weak security configurations, or known software flaws to gain control over potentially millions of IoT devices. Think smart cameras, DVRs, home routers, even smart home hubs. These devices then lie dormant, waiting for commands. When the attacker decides to launch a DDoS, they instruct their botnet, including all these compromised IoT devices, to simultaneously send a flood of traffic to the chosen target.
Wow, so my unassuming smart doorbell camera could be part of an attack taking down a bank's website, and I'd have no idea.
Precisely. The individual device might only send a small amount of traffic, but multiplied by millions of devices, the collective power is immense, far greater than a single computer could generate. This makes IoT devices incredibly attractive to attackers for building these botnets, as they are numerous, often poorly secured, and their compromise might go unnoticed by the owner for a long, long time. The goal isn't to steal data from your camera necessarily, but to use its internet connection as a tool in a much larger cyber attack.
That's a sobering thought.
Okay.
Moving on to man in the middle, or MIT-M. This involves intercepting communication. How does this look in the context of IoT specifically?
Right. A man-in-the-middle attack happens when an attacker positions themselves sort of secretly between two communicating parties to intercept, read, and potentially alter their communication. In IoT, this often occurs between a device and the cloud service it connects to, or between a device and a mobile app controlling it, or even between devices communicating locally on a network.
How does an attacker actually get into the middle? Like, how do they position themselves there?
Well, it often leverages insecure communication protocols where data isn't encrypted, allowing them to simply listen in on the network traffic. That's one way. They might also compromise a point on the network itself, like an insecure home router with weak admin credentials, or exploit vulnerabilities in device-to-device communication protocols. Public Wi-Fi is another common vector if device communication isn't properly secured end-to-end.
Okay. And what kind of data or control is at risk if they manage to intercept your communication?
Oh, a huge range. Really depends on the device. Sensitive personal data being sent from the device to the cloud, think location history from a tracker, health metrics from a wearable, audio or video feeds from a camera or smart speaker, energy consumption data from a smart meter. They could also intercept commands being sent to the device, like a command to unlock a smart lock, disarm a security system, change settings on industrial equipment, or even inject fake sensor readings. So the attacker can eavesdrop, steal data, or manipulate the device's operation.
The potential for real-world impact seems pretty significant there.
Mhm.
Okay, and finally, device hijacking. This sounds exactly like what it is gaining control of the device itself.
It is, yeah. Device hijacking is gaining unauthorized administrative or root-level access to the device's operating system and functionality. This typically happens by exploiting software vulnerabilities, using those hard-coded or default credentials that haven't been changed, or sometimes leveraging insecure physical access ports on the device. Once an attacker has hijacked a device, they basically have full control over its capabilities.
Right. So what's the motivation there? What can they do once they control the device?
The possibilities are vast and often more targeted than, say, a DDoS attack. They could use a hijacked smart camera to spy on occupants, or a hijacked smart speaker to eavesdrop on conversations. They could steal credentials or data stored right there on the device. They could use a hijacked smart lock or garage door opener for physical intrusion. And as we discussed, a hijacked device can be used as a launchpad for attacks on other devices on the local network or participate in those larger botnets. In industrial or medical settings, hijacking a device could have absolutely catastrophic consequences, altering critical processes or disabling life-sustaining equipment.
Yeah, you can definitely see the danger there.
And our source material reinforces these points with statistics on security breaches. Now, it might not give exact numbers, but the consistent theme is the increasing scale and frequency of IoT-related security incidents. What does this trend really tell us about the current state of IoT security?
Well, it paints a pretty clear picture, doesn't it? That the proliferation of devices has really outpaced the implementation of robust security practices across the board. It tells us that attackers see IoT as relatively low-hanging fruit compared to more hardened traditional IT systems. The increasing numbers indicate that vulnerabilities are widespread, exploits are readily available, and the business of compromising these devices, whether for botnets, data theft, or targeted attacks, is unfortunately thriving. It shows a significant gap between the potential of IoT and the current reality of its security posture.
And these breaches aren't just abstract cybersecurity events. They have tangible, often severe impacts on businesses and individuals. The source highlights this through case studies, even if they're generalized. What kind of real-world impacts have we seen, and what are the key lessons from these scenarios?
For businesses, The impacts are multifaceted, right? There's the direct financial cost of responding to a breach, the investigation, remediation, legal fees, potential fines from regulators, and the cost of downtime if services are disrupted. Then there's also the significant damage to reputation and the erosion of customer trust, which can be hard to quantify but absolutely devastating in the long run.
I mean, imagine being the smart lock company whose devices were used in a string of burglaries. Regaining consumer confidence after that is a huge challenge.
Definitely. And beyond reputational damage, attacks can cause significant operational disruption. For industries relying on connected sensors and controllers, manufacturing, energy, transportation, a successful attack can halt production, disable critical infrastructure, or compromise safety systems. This could lead to physical damage, environmental harm, or even, tragically, loss of life in some scenarios. And the connection back to you, the listener, is crucial here. Why should you care about these business impacts? Because you are often the user of these affected services or the owner of the vulnerable devices. A data breach at a smart home platform could expose sensitive details about your daily life. An attack on a connected vehicle system could impact your safety. Disruptions to industrial or utility systems could affect essential services you rely on. Basically, the security posture of the companies making and deploying these devices directly impacts your privacy and safety in the connected world.
Yeah, it really highlights that IoT security is not just an industry problem, it's truly a societal challenge. And the threat landscape isn't static, it's constantly evolving alongside the technology itself. What emerging threats are we starting to see or anticipate in the IoT space?
Well, we're seeing attackers leverage increasingly sophisticated techniques and target new areas. For instance, threats are emerging that use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify vulnerabilities more effectively, or maybe to craft highly convincing social engineering attacks targeting the people who manage IoT systems. Supply chain attacks are also a growing concern, where attackers compromise components, hardware, or software before they are even assembled into the final device or deployed.
That's a particularly worrying trend, isn't it? Attacking the building blocks before the product is even finished.
Absolutely. It fundamentally compromises the device's integrity from birth, you could say.
Mm.
We're also anticipating attacks on less conventional IoT sectors, not just consumer gadgets, but deeply embedded devices in agriculture, environmental monitoring, smart cities infrastructure like traffic management, and critical medical devices. These areas often have unique vulnerabilities, are harder to monitor, and can have extremely high impacts if compromised.
What makes these newer emerging threats particularly challenging compared to, say, the DDoS attacks we were discussing earlier?
Well, they often target deeper, more foundational layers, the hardware, the firmware, the trust chain right from manufacturing. They can be stealthier, much harder to detect with traditional methods. Attacks leveraging AI might be highly adaptive, changing their tactics on the fly. And attacks on industrial or medical devices often require specialized knowledge and access, but their potential consequences, physical harm, infrastructure collapse, are just far more severe than simply joining a botnet. Securing against these requires a shift from basic device hardening to securing the entire complex supply chain and ecosystem, which is a much, much bigger undertaking.
Okay, so we've established that the threat landscape is vast, complex, and rapidly evolving. It's pretty clear that relying on fixing issues after deployment is basically a losing battle. This leads us directly to the critical point our source material makes. Security must be a fundamental part of the design process from day one. It's not an optional add-on.
Right, exactly. Like building robust locks and a strong foundation into a house blueprint, not trying to nail them on after the walls are already up. For IoT, where devices might be deployed remotely for years without physical access, this security by design approach is just non-negotiable. So what are the core design elements the source emphasizes must be baked in right from the start?
The source points to three key things: secure communication protocols, implementing robust encryption methods, and establishing secure APIs.
Okay, let's break those down a bit. Secure communication protocols, what does that actually look like for a device that might be talking to a cloud server or a mobile app or maybe other devices in the home?
It means using protocols that are specifically designed to encrypt data in transit and authenticate the endpoints involved. Standard web security protocols like TLS, Transport Layer Security, which is the successor to SSL, are absolutely fundamental for cloud communication. For device-to-device or local network communication, protocols like MQTT, CoAP, or Thread need to be implemented with their security features enabled using things like TLS, datagram TLS, DTLS, or proper authentication mechanisms like mutually authenticated TLS. Critically, not just sending data in plain text or using weak, easily crackable proprietary encryption methods.
And what's the risk if you don't use secure protocols?
Total exposure, basically. Man-in-the-middle attackers can simply read all the data being transmitted, sensor readings, control commands, personal information, whatever it is. They can also inject their own malicious commands or data, completely compromising the device's functionality and potentially the wider network. It's like sending postcards with all your sensitive information written on them in the mail for anyone to read. Not good.
Yeah, definitely not good.
Okay, next up, robust encryption methods. Where does encryption need to be applied for IoT, beyond just the communication part?
Right, so encryption is needed for data in transit, as we just discussed with protocols, but it's also crucial for data at rest. This means encrypting sensitive data stored locally on the device itself, things like configuration settings, collected sensor data like location logs or health metrics, any cached credentials, device logs, and it absolutely applies to data stored in the cloud platforms that manage the devices and aggregate information from them. That needs to be encrypted too.
And why is emphasizing robust encryption so key? Can't you just use any encryption algorithm and call it a day?
Well, no. Using weak or outdated encryption algorithms, like older versions of DES or RC4, is pretty trivial for modern computers to break. It gives a false sense of security. Even using strong algorithms like AES can be ineffective if the keys are weak, maybe hard-coded into the device firmware, which happens, or managed insecurely. Robust encryption means using strong, current cryptographic algorithms with appropriately long key lengths, implementing them correctly, and managing the cryptographic key securely throughout the device's lifecycle. This includes provisioning keys during manufacturing, storing them securely on the device, ideally in hardware, which we'll touch on later, and having a plan for rotating or updating them when necessary. Weak encryption is almost worse than none. Robust encryption provides a real barrier.
That makes sense. And finally, the third element, securing APIs. APIs, application programming interfaces, are essentially the interfaces that allow software components, devices, and services to interact. What role do they play in IoT security?
APIs are really the connective tissue of the entire IoT ecosystem. Your smartphone app controls your smart light bulb via an API provided by the light bulb manufacturer's cloud service. A smart meter might expose an API to the utility company. These interfaces are where commands are sent, data is retrieved, and devices are managed. If these APIs aren't properly secured, they become massive entry points for attackers.
Okay, so what makes an API secure in this context? What are we looking for?
It requires strong authentication to verify the identity of whatever is trying to access the API, whether that's a mobile app, another device, or a backend service. You need to know who's asking. It also needs robust authorization mechanisms to ensure the authenticated entity only has permission to perform the specific actions and access the specific data it's actually allowed to. Principle of least privilege, basically. And of course, the communication with the API itself should be encrypted, again, using TLS or similar protocols. Insecure APIs are frequently targeted in breaches because they often provide direct access to device controls or sensitive aggregated data. They're a prime target.
Right. Now, our source moves beyond these specific technical components to critical processes that need to happen during design, namely threat modeling and risk assessment. What does threat modeling an IoT system actually involve, and why is doing it early so crucial?
Threat modeling is essentially a structured process of thinking like an attacker. You identify potential security threats and vulnerabilities in a system before it's built or deployed. So for an IoT device or system, let's say a connected camera, you'd map out the whole system. The device itself, its software, its communication channels, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the mobile app it uses, the cloud service it connects to, any user interaction points. Then you brainstorm potential threats at each point. Could someone physically tamper with the camera, eavesdrop on its Wi-Fi communication, hack the cloud server, exploit a bug in the mobile app, brute force the user's password? You list them all out.
And for each of those potential threats, you analyze the vulnerabilities that could allow it to happen and what the impact would be if it did succeed, right?
Exactly. You're proactively looking for weaknesses. And doing this early in the design phase is paramount. It allows you to identify fundamental architectural weaknesses before any code is written or hardware is manufactured. It's vastly cheaper and faster to change a digital blueprint or a software architecture early on than it is to recall and patch millions of devices already out there in users' homes or industrial sites. Threat modeling directly informs those secure design decisions, like if tampering is a risk, maybe you need secure hardware or tamper-evident seals. If cloud hacking is a risk, maybe you minimize sensitive data stored in the cloud or implement really robust access controls.
Yeah, it totally shifts security from being a reaction to an incident to being a proactive design consideration from the get-go. This leads nicely into the key design principles for secure IoT solutions mentioned in our source. Beyond the specific technologies like encryption or APIs, what are these overarching principles that should guide secure development?
Well, principles like minimizing the attack surface, basically. Only enable features, ports, and services that are absolutely necessary for the device's intended function. Every unnecessary feature is a potential vulnerability waiting to happen. Another critical one is the principle of least privilege, ensuring that each component, whether it's a specific software process on the device or the device itself accessing a cloud resource, only has the minimum permissions and access necessary to perform its designated task. A smart light bulb should not need access to your contact list or the ability to reconfigure your home router. That seems obvious, but...
Right, so even if one part gets compromised, the potential damage is contained because it didn't have excessive permissions. Makes sense.
Precisely. Secure defaults are also fundamental. Devices should ship in the most secure configuration possible right out of the box. Default passwords should be unique and complex, or better yet, the device should force the user to create a new, strong password upon initial setup. Features that increase risk, like remote access capabilities, should probably be off by default and require explicit user opt-in, maybe with clear security warnings.
And something often overlooked, but absolutely critical, as the source points out, is designing for updatability and manageability from day one. Devices need a secure, reliable mechanism to receive firmware updates throughout their expected lifespan. Vulnerabilities will be discovered after deployment, and without a way to patch them remotely and securely, the device's security posture will just degrade over time, becoming more and more vulnerable.
These principles seem so logical when you lay them out like that, but the sheer prevalence of insecure devices out there shows they aren't always followed in practice, often due to, time-to-market pressures or cost constraints.
Indeed. And to help developers and organizations apply these principles consistently, the source mentions examples of frameworks that support secure design. What kind of frameworks are we talking about here, and how do they actually aid the process?
These are basically structured methodologies and sets of guidelines that provide a kind of roadmap for integrating security across the entire product lifecycle, not just the initial design phase. That of security development lifecycle frameworks, sometimes called SDLs. They cover everything from concept generation and requirements gathering right through design, implementation, testing, deployment, ongoing maintenance, and even secure decommissioning at the end of life. Organizations like OAS, the Open Web Application Security Project, though maybe best known for web security, also have specific initiatives focused on IoT. They provide really valuable resources like lists of common IoT vulnerabilities to watch out for and secure coding guidelines specifically tailored for connected devices.
Ah, okay. So instead of each company or development team trying to reinvent the wheel every time, they can leverage these established frameworks and guidelines.
Exactly. These frameworks help standardize the approach. They ensure critical security activities like threat modeling, security testing, and code reviews are actually integrated into the development process, not just bolted on at the end. They often provide checklists or specific requirements tailored to the unique challenges of IoT, like dealing with constrained devices or complex ecosystems. They really help bridge the gap between abstract security principles and concrete development practices, ensuring security is a consistent consideration throughout.
Okay, moving on from the design phase, our source material next emphasizes the critical necessity of implementing device authentication. If secure design is like building the secure house, authentication is making sure only authorized individuals, or in this case, devices, can actually get past the front door. Why is authentication a particularly thorny problem in the world of IoT?
Yeah, it's tricky because, as we discussed earlier, you're dealing with potentially millions or even billions of incredibly diverse devices. Unlike a human user logging into a website with a username and password, the IoT devices often operate autonomously. They might not have a keyboard or a screen for interaction, and they need to authenticate automatically and securely when they power on or connect to a network. Their identities aren't tied to a human user, but to the device itself.
Right. Plus, many of these devices are resource constrained. They have limited processing power, memory, and maybe battery life, which makes implementing complex cryptographic authentication schemes pretty challenging. And they also need to be securely provisioned with their identity credentials during manufacturing, which is a whole supply chain security problem in itself. How do you get that initial secret onto the device safely?
So what are the main authentication methods our source explores as being applicable to the IoT space?
It looks at a few key approaches: digital certificates, methods derived from frameworks like OAuth, and potentially things like biometrics or unique hardware-based identifiers.
Okay, Let's start with digital certificates. How do they actually work as an ID for a device?
A digital certificate, which relies on public key infrastructure, or PKI, acts like a cryptographically verified ID card for a device. It contains information identifying the device, or maybe its manufacturer or owner, and crucially, the device's public key. All of this information is digitally signed by a trusted third party, known as the Certificate Authority, or CA. When a device tries to establish a connection, say, with its cloud platform, it presents its certificate. The server can then verify the CA's signature to trust that the certificate is legitimate, and use the device's public key contained within it to establish a secure, encrypted communication channel using protocols like TLS-SSL.
So that provides pretty strong identity assurance, right? Ensuring the server is actually talking to the legitimate device and not some imposter.
Exactly. It's a very robust method for identity verification.
But the source hints at complexity, especially for large IoT deployments. What's the catch?
It is complex, yeah. Managing PKI at the scale of millions or billions of devices is a significant operational challenge. You need secure processes for generating and provisioning unique certificates during manufacturing. You need to manage the life cycle of those certificates, think renewal before they expire, and revocation if a device is compromised, lost, or decommissioned. And you need to securely distribute the trust anchors, the CA certificates themselves, to all entities that need to verify device identities. This requires substantial back-end infrastructure and very careful operational procedures. It's not trivial, especially for low-cost, high-volume devices.
Okay, that makes sense. How about OAuth? I know this mostly for user authentication and authorization flows on the web, like logging into a site using Google or Facebook. How does it apply to devices?
Well, while OAuth is fundamentally an authorization framework often used by users to grant applications limited access to their data, similar token-based approaches derived from oath principles are definitely relevant for devices. A device might authenticate itself to a central service initially, perhaps using a certificate or a pre-shared key, and then obtain temporary access tokens using an OAuth-like flow. These tokens grant the device specific, limited permissions to access certain APIs or resources, maybe on behalf of a user or the system itself.
So it's less about the device's permanent identity and more about giving it temporary permission slips for specific tasks.
Exactly, that's a good way to put it. This approach provides a more secure alternative to hard-coding static API keys or other long-lived credentials onto the device. If a token is compromised, its validity is limited in time and scope, and it can be easily revoked without needing to re-provision the entire device identity. It's generally well-suited for devices interacting frequently with cloud APIs and services.
Okay. And the mention of biometrics. This one feels a bit unusual when talking about devices themselves. It's not like my smart fridge has a fingerprint scanner. Or does it?
Probably not. You're right, it's less about fingerprint scanning the toaster. In the context of device authentication, this could refer to leveraging unique inherent physical characteristics of the device's hardware components to verify its authenticity. These are sometimes called physical unclonable functions, or PUFs. It's like a unique hardware fingerprint derived from tiny manufacturing variations in the silicon itself, making it extremely difficult to clone. Alternatively, biometrics in this context might refer to behavioral biometrics, where the device's identity is inferred and continuously verified based on its unique communication patterns, timing characteristics, or resource usage patterns, often using machine learning models to spot deviations.
Interesting. So using the hardware's unique physical nature or its typical behavior as a form of ID.
Precisely. These hardware-based or behavioral methods can provide a strong root of trust or an additional layer of verification. However, they face challenges with cost, computational complexity, especially PUFs, potential variability for behavioral methods, and achieving standardization across diverse hardware platforms. So it's often a more niche or complementary authentication method in IoT compared to certificates or token-based approaches currently.
Got it. Let's delve deeper into the core discussion points here.
Yeah.
The source emphasizes the role of identity management in IoT. Why is managing the identity of a device so different and often harder than managing human user identities in, say, a corporate environment?
Well, with human users, you typically have established HR processes, employee names, defined roles, regular login cycles, password complexity policies, and mature identity and access management (IAM) systems. For devices, you have a massive scale problem, potentially millions or billions of them. They lack human oversight or interaction for managing credentials. Their identity might be tied to hardware serial numbers, unique cryptographic keys burned into silicon during manufacturing, or digital certificate provisioned at the factory.
Right. And the real challenge, as the source likely points out, is managing the entire life cycle of that device identity securely and doing it at scale. How do you securely provision that identity during manufacturing without it being intercepted or cloned? How do you authenticate that device automatically and reliably every time it connects? How do you authorize its actions based on its verified identity? And critically, how do you securely revoke that device's identity and access if it gets compromised or sold or just decommissioned, especially for devices that might be offline or deployed in remote, hard-to-reach locations? This entire lifecycle management is a monumental technical and logistical challenge unique to IoT.
Absolutely. And if a device's identity is compromised, the implications can be really severe.
Definitely. An attacker could impersonate that device to gain access to the network or cloud services it connects to, potentially accessing sensitive data or sending malicious commands under a cloak of legitimacy. They could use the trusted identity of the compromised device as a stepping stone to attack other devices or systems on the network. It completely undermines the trust framework you're trying to build.
So the source likely offers a comparative analysis of these different authentication method certificates, token-based, hardware-based. What are the key trade-offs in terms of security strength, complexity, scalability, and suitability for different types of IoT devices?
Yeah, it generally breaks down like this. Digital certificates using PKI offer very high security and establish strong, verifiable trust relationships. They're well suited for critical infrastructure, industrial controls, gateways, or any device where a robust long-term identity is paramount. However, as we discussed, they are complex and can be costly to manage at massive scale, especially for very low-cost, simple devices where the overhead of PKI management might outweigh the device's value.
Okay, what about the token-based methods?
Token-based methods, like those derived from Oath, are generally more flexible, often more scalable, and easier to manage dynamically in terms of granting and revoking permissions. They are particularly well suited for devices that interact heavily with cloud services and APIs, as they provide granular authorization control. The overall security, though, depends heavily on the strength of the initial authentication mechanism used to get the token and ensuring the tokens themselves are managed securely.
And the hardware-based identities.
Hardware-based identities, like those using PUFs or secure elements, offer a very strong root of trust tied directly to the physical silicon. This makes them highly resistant to many software-based attacks and cloning attempts. They are excellent for high-security devices or for securely storing critical cryptographic keys. The downside is that they add hardware cost and design complexity and might not be feasible or necessary for the absolute lowest cost, lowest risk devices.
And I assume simpler methods still exist.
Oh yeah, simpler methods like pre-shared keys, essentially shared passwords between device and server, or basic password authentication are easy and cheap to implement. However, they offer very weak security, don't scale well for unique credentials, provide no easy way to revoke compromised keys, and offer very little granular control. They're generally considered unsuitable for anything but the absolute lowest risk isolated applications in modern IoT. The choice really depends heavily on the specific device's capabilities, its cost constraints, the threat model you've developed for it, and the operational environment where it will live.
That makes sense. It's a trade-off analysis. This leads us neatly into the significant practical challenges in device management and onboarding that the source likely details. Getting potentially millions of diverse devices securely authenticated and into a properly managed state is far from trivial.
Oh, it's a massive logistical and security nightmare, potentially. How do you ensure that the device connecting for the very first time is actually the legitimate device and hasn't been tampered with somewhere between the factory and the customer? How do you securely provision it with its unique identity, those cryptographic keys, certificates, or credentials, without requiring a user to manually configure complex settings, which they probably won't do correctly, or risk exposing sensitive information during the setup process? This is where concepts like zero-touch provisioning become really crucial. The goal is for devices to securely authenticate and configure themselves automatically upon connecting to the network for the first time, often by relying on a pre-provisioned secure identity element burned in at the factory, or by interacting with a trusted onboarding service in the cloud.
Right. And once they're successfully onboarded, the management challenges don't stop. They continue throughout the device's multi-year lifespan. How do you securely push firmware updates to potentially millions of devices, some of which might be offline intermittently or sitting behind restrictive firewalls? How do you rotate cryptographic keys or update security credentials securely across that vast fleet? And how do you detect if a specific device has been compromised and then securely revoke its access from the network, ideally without accidentally impacting legitimate nearby devices that might share some network infrastructure?
These are really complex operational hurdles that span secure communications, robust identity management, and having scalable back-end infrastructure capable of handling it all. So how does having strong authentication in place help address these ongoing management challenges?
Authentication is absolutely the bedrock for secure management. By securely verifying the identity of the device, you can ensure that critical operations like firmware updates are only delivered to legitimate devices from a trusted source, preventing attackers from injecting malicious updates. You ensure that sensitive configuration commands are only sent to and accepted by the intended authenticated device, and if a device is detected as compromised, its verified identity allows you to target it specifically for quarantine or revocation. You can remove its access credentials from the network and contain the incident much more effectively, which is far more manageable than trying to identify and isolate some untrusted, unknown entity spewing malicious traffic. Strong identity enables targeted control.
Okay, so we've navigated the threats, the critical importance of secure design, and the intricate complexities of device authentication. Now, our source shifts focus to an area that is arguably one of the most critical and challenging for IoT, data privacy and compliance. IoT devices are incredibly powerful data collectors, often capturing highly personal or sensitive information about us and our environments. How does this intersect with the rapidly evolving landscape of data privacy regulations?
Yeah, it's pretty much a head-on collision. IoT devices, by their very nature, collect vast amounts of data about user behavior, location, health status, environmental conditions, energy usage, you name it. At the same time, regulations like Europe's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and California's CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, among others, are fundamentally designed to give individuals greater control over their personal data. They mandate things like transparency, user consent, rights for individuals to access and delete their data, and strict requirements for how that data is processed, secured, and transferred. Because IoT devices are so deeply embedded in our lives and collect such intimate, often continuous data streams, they fall squarely under the purview of these regulations. This creates significant compliance hurdles for the manufacturers and service providers behind these devices.
Right, so it's not just about protecting the data from hackers, but also about handling it responsibly and legally according to user rights in these complex regulations. What are some of the specific requirements these laws impose on IoT companies that the source would likely highlight?
Well, key requirements include obtaining clear, explicit, and informed consent from users before collecting their personal data, especially if it's sensitive data like health information. This is challenging on devices that might not have a screen or a simple user interface to present a detailed privacy policy and get meaningful consent. Users must also have the right to access the data the device collects about them, and, crucially, the right to request that their data be deleted, the right to be forgotten. This is technically very complex when data might be distributed across devices, edge gateways, cloud servers, and various back-end systems.
Are there others?
Yes, definitely. There's the principle of data minimization, which means companies should only collect the minimum amount of personal data necessary to provide the specific service or feature they're offering, and not just collect everything possible just in case. And these regulations impose strict requirements on data security, using appropriate technical measures like encryption and access controls, and potentially place restrictions on transferring personal data across international borders. For example, if a smart device collects data in Europe and sends it to a server hosted in the US, there are very specific legal mechanisms and safeguards that need to be in place for that transfer to be lawful under GDPR.
Wow. These aren't just minor tweaks to a privacy policy. They sound like they require fundamental changes in how IoT data is designed to be handled throughout its entire life cycle.
Absolutely. They necessitate building privacy considerations into the system from the very beginning. Which brings us neatly to the concept of privacy by design that our source emphasizes. Can you explain what that means in the context of IoT?
Sure. Privacy by design isn't an afterthought, something you try to bolt on after the product is already built. It's about integrating privacy principles and protections into the core architecture and design of the IoT system right from the ground up. You don't finish building the product and then ask your legal team, okay, how do we make this compliant? Instead, you start the design process by asking questions like, How can we build this product in a way that maximizes user privacy by default and makes compliance easier to achieve?
Okay, so what are some practical strategies for actually implementing privacy by design when you're developing an IoT product or service?
One key strategy is that principle of data minimization we just mentioned. Consciously design the system to collect as little personally identifiable data as possible to achieve the necessary function. Can you achieve the goal without collecting location data? Can you process sensitive data locally on the device, or perhaps an edge gateway, and only send anonymized or aggregated insights to the cloud, rather than the raw sensitive data? Another is providing users with granular and easily accessible controls over their data collection and sharing preferences, perhaps through a companion mobile app or a web portal. Transparency is also vital, clearly and simply explaining to users what data is being collected, why it's being collected, how it's going to be used, and who it might be shared with. This needs to be done even within the constraints of potentially simple device interfaces. Using strong encryption for data both in transit and at rest is, of course, a fundamental technical measure for privacy protection. And conducting privacy impact assessments, PIAs, early and repeatedly throughout the development lifecycle helps proactively identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before they become embedded in the product.
Why is embracing privacy by design essential, not just for avoiding potentially hefty regulatory fines, but also for building and maintaining that crucial user trust we talked about earlier?
Because in today's connected world, privacy is rapidly becoming a significant factor in consumer trust and purchasing decisions. Users are increasingly wary of devices that feel like they're constantly listening, watching, or collecting excessive amounts of data without clear benefits or user control. Companies that are transparent about their data practices, give users meaningful control, and demonstrably prioritize privacy in their product design are much more likely to earn and keep that user trust over the long term. Privacy by design essentially signals to the user that their personal data is respected and protected, which is absolutely foundational for the widespread adoption and acceptance of connected technologies, especially in sensitive areas like healthcare or home security.
Right. The source likely presents some case studies of regulatory compliance in IoT applications, demonstrating real-world challenges and solutions. While generalizing, what types of scenarios might these cover, and what lessons can we typically draw from them?
You might see scenarios involving, say, smart home companies that had to completely redesign their device setup processes to obtain valid opt-in consent for data collection. They might have struggled with how to make complex legal language understandable and accessible on small device screens or within quick setup flows. Or you might see a case study about a health wearable company grappling with the challenge of implementing the right to be forgotten. They would need to devise complex technical solutions to reliably find and delete a specific user's data across potentially thousands of deployed devices, various cloud databases, and analytical systems, ensuring it's truly and permanently erased everywhere.
So the challenges often revolve around balancing user experience with strict legal requirements.
Exactly. And the technical complexity of managing distributed data, plus the need for really close collaboration between legal teams, product managers, designers, and engineers right from the start. The solutions often involve significant architectural changes to how data is handled, substantial investment in secure data storage and processing infrastructure, and sometimes quite creative approaches to user interfaces for consent management and privacy controls. It's rarely a simple fix.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding the threats, the importance of secure design, the complexities of device authentication, and now managing data privacy and compliance. But what happens once these devices are actually out there, deployed in the real world? Threats evolve, new vulnerabilities are discovered, and attackers might find ways around even the best initial defenses. Our source's next section, Real-Time Threat Detection and Response, focuses squarely on the operational side, monitoring deployed devices continuously and reacting quickly if something goes wrong.
Right, this is like the vital surveillance system and the rapid reaction force for the connected world. What kind of tools and technologies are typically involved in continuously monitoring potentially vast numbers of diverse devices for signs of compromise or malicious activity?
It generally involves deploying various monitoring agents, network probes, or sophisticated network analysis tools that collect telemetry data from the devices themselves and from the network segments they operate on. This data includes things like network traffic patterns, who are devices talking to, how much data are they sending, communication destinations, are they talking to known command and control servers, device resource usage, is CPU or memory usage suddenly spiking, system logs of activity, and even sometimes deviations in physical sensor readings that seem anomalous or out of character for the device. The tools analyzing this data are often sophisticated platforms, frequently cloud-based, that can ingest this massive stream of data from potentially millions of devices and use complex analytics to look for anomalies, known attack patterns, or policy violations.
Okay. And the source highlights the significant role of AI and machine learning in this process. Why are traditional signature-based detection methods, like those used in classic antivirus software, often insufficient for the dynamic and diverse IoT landscape?
Traditional signature-based detection primarily looks for known patterns, specific sequences of bytes in malicious code, or well-defined attack sequences that have been seen before. This works reasonably well for identifying known malware on standard computer systems like Windows PCs, but the IoT landscape is just incredibly diverse and constantly changing. You have new devices appearing all the time, running different software, using different protocols. New vulnerabilities are discovered frequently, and many attacks might not involve traditional malware in the classic sense, but rather involve exploiting configuration weaknesses or instructing a legitimate device to behave maliciously like a smart bulb attempting to access your online banking website. That kind of weird behavior doesn't fit a standard virus signature.
Right. So how does AI and ML provide a better approach for detecting these kinds of threats in IoT?
AI and machine learning techniques, particularly anomaly detection, can learn what normal behavior looks like for specific types of devices or groups of devices operating within a certain environment. They build a behavioral baseline over time. For example, a smart thermostat typically communicates with the internet to get weather data and with its manufacturer's cloud service for remote control, usually sending relatively small packets of data at predictable intervals. AML algorithms can learn this normal pattern. Now, if that same thermostat suddenly starts attempting to connect to hundreds of unknown IP addresses, generating massive amounts of outbound traffic, or maybe starts scanning other devices on the local network, the AI system can detect the significant deviation from its learned normal behavior as a real-time anomaly. This could strongly indicate that the thermostat has been compromised and is being weaponized, maybe for a DDoS attack or trying to spread laterally within the network.
Okay. So it's more about detecting suspicious actions and behavioral changes rather than just looking for known malicious code signatures. This allows it to potentially detect novel, previously unseen attacks,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. That's the key advantage. It can flag behavior that's statistically unlikely or deviate significantly from the established norm for that device or device type, even if the specific attack technique has never been encountered before.
What are the main advantages and also the potential challenges of using AML for IoT threat detection?
Well, the big advantages include the ability to identify zero-day or novel threats by spotting that unusual behavior, the potential to scale monitoring effectively across millions or billions of devices in a way that human analysts simply couldn't do manually, and the speed of real-time analysis and alerting, which is crucial for rapid response. The challenges, however, are also significant. You need huge amounts of relevant data to train accurate behavioral models across the vast diversity of IoT devices and their specific usage patterns. There's the persistent risk of false positives flagging legitimate but maybe unusual or new behavior as suspicious, which can lead to alert fatigue or unnecessary disruption if responses are automated. And there are computational resources required for real-time analysis, especially if some of that processing needs to happen on resource-constrained edge devices rather than powerful cloud servers. Building truly effective ML models for IoT security requires deep expertise in both the device behavior and the potential attack vectors.
Okay, so once an anomaly or a potential threat is detected, whether by AI or other means, rapid response is crucial in the highly interconnected IoT world. What are the key steps involved in an effective incident response process, as likely outlined by our source?
The absolute best practice, emphasized time and again, is having a predefined, documented, and regularly rehearsed incident response plan. You absolutely cannot be figuring this stuff out on the fly during an active security incident. Panic sets in, mistakes are made. The plan typically involves several key phases. First, containment. This means taking immediate steps to isolate the compromised device or segment the affected part of the network to prevent the threat from spreading further. Stop the bleeding, essentially.
Makes sense. What's next?
Then comes investigation. This involves carefully analyzing the incident to understand how the compromise occurred in the first place, which devices are affected, what data might be at risk or has been exfiltrated, and determining the full scope and nature of the attack. You need to know what you're dealing with.
Okay. Contain, investigate.
Next is eradication. This is the phase where you actively remove the threat from the system. This might involve patching the vulnerability that was exploited, cleaning malware from compromised devices, resetting credentials, or even completely wiping and re-imaging affected systems.
And finally,
Finally, recovery. This involves restoring the affected systems and services back to normal operation, verifying that the threat is completely gone and systems are clean, and crucially, implementing lessons learned from the incident analysis to improve defenses and prevent similar incidents from happening again in the future. This might involve pushing out new security updates, changing network configurations, or updating security policies.
why is a swift and coordinated response particularly critical in IoT compared to, say, an attack targeting just a single corporate server?
Because the high degree of interconnectedness in IoT means attacks can spread horizontally across devices on a local network or propagate rapidly through shared cloud services extremely quickly. A compromised IoT device is rarely just an isolated incident. It's often a potential entry point or a launch pad for broader attacks. A slow or uncoordinated response means more devices get compromised, the attack surface expands rapidly, and the potential impact escalates very quickly from a single device issue to a widespread network problem or even a large-scale botnet incident affecting external targets. Coordination across different teams, security operations, device engineering, cloud platform operations, perhaps even customer support is absolutely vital because IoT incidents often cross these traditional organizational silos.
That makes perfect sense. The source also touches on the balance between automated versus manual response strategies. What does this entail? What's the difference?
Okay, so automated response means programming the security system, perhaps the SIM or SOAR platform, to take predefined actions automatically as soon as a specific type of anomaly or threat is detected, without waiting for human intervention. For example, if a device suddenly starts exhibiting network behavior characteristic of joining a DDoS botnet, like sending UDP floods to a known target, the system might be configured to automatically block its outbound network communication or quarantine it at the network switch level. Manual response, on the other hand, requires a human security analyst to review the alert generated by the detection system, investigate the context further, and then decide on and manually execute the appropriate response actions.
Okay, so when is automated response typically most appropriate, and what are its main benefits?
Automated response is excellent for achieving speed and scalability, especially for responding to well-understood, high-confidence attack patterns, or maybe lower-risk anomalies where the impact of a potential false positive is minimal. It allows for near-instant reaction, potentially containing threats before they can spread significantly, and it significantly reduces the burden on human analysts by handling routine or high-volume incidents automatically.
And conversely, when is manual intervention still necessary or preferable?
Manual intervention remains crucial for complex, ambiguous, or novel attacks that require human judgment and deeper analysis to understand the true nature and scope of the threat before taking action. It's also necessary in situations where an incorrect automated action could cause significant disruption, impact critical business services, or even pose safety risks. You wouldn't want an automated system unilaterally shutting down critical medical equipment or traffic control systems based on a potential anomaly without human verification and careful consideration of the consequences.
Right, so it sounds like there's a necessary balance to strike.
Exactly. Over-automating responses can lead to disruptive false positives and unintended consequences, while under-automating can leave you unable to respond effectively at the scale and speed required by modern threats, especially in IoT. The most effective approach often involves a hybrid model. Maybe automated initial actions for high-confidence threats or basic containment, like blocking known bad IPs, followed by rapid human-driven investigation and decision-making for more nuanced, complex, or high-impact responses.
This brings us to a point our source emphasizes is absolutely foundational, perhaps even more so than the technology and processes, building a strong culture of security. It highlights that all the technical measures in the world can potentially be undermined if the human element, the people involved, isn't aligned and security conscious. Why is a strong security culture so fundamental for achieving resilience, especially in IoT?
Because people are often, as the saying goes, the last line of defense, and sometimes, regrettably, the first point of failure. Even the most technically secure device can be compromised if, say, an engineer accidentally hard-codes a secret key in publicly accessible code, or a quality assurance tester overlooks a critical vulnerability during testing, or an IT administrator configures a back-end server insecurely, or even if a customer falls for a phishing attack that grants an attacker access to their device management credentials. A strong security culture means that security isn't just seen as a set of burdensome rules or solely the security team's job. It's understood, valued, and prioritized by everyone involved in the product's lifecycle and ongoing operation, from concept to decommissioning.
The source talks about fostering a mindset where everyone prioritizes security. Who does everyone really include in the context of an IoT product? And what are some of the mechanisms mentioned to help build this kind of mindset?
It's truly cross-functional. Everyone includes the product designers thinking about privacy implications from the start, the hardware engineers selecting secure components and considering tamper resistance, the software developers writing secure code, especially challenging for resource-constrained devices, the QA testers specifically looking for security flaws, not just functional bugs, the manufacturing team ensuring secure provisioning processes, the operations team managing the back-end infrastructure securely, the customer support team guiding users through security issues safely, and even sales and marketing in how they communicate security features accurately without revealing sensitive implementation details. Mechanisms to build this mindset include things like ongoing, role-specific security training, regular security awareness campaigns to keep it top of mind, perhaps using gamification to make learning engaging, and critically fostering collaborative team structures where security is a shared discussion.
Okay, let's dive into that ongoing training point a bit more. What specific security knowledge do developers and managers typically need, and why is it so important that this training be continuous, not just a one-off thing?
Developers need training specific to secure coding practices for the particular platforms and languages they use in IoT development. This means recognizing and avoiding common vulnerabilities like buffer overflows, injection flaws, or insecure data handling. They need to understand how to implement cryptographic functions correctly, which is harder than it sounds, how to securely manage credentials and secrets within the code and device, and they need training on secure communication protocols and how to leverage secure hardware features if available. Managers, on the other hand, need to understand the business implications of IoT security risks. They need to know how to prioritize security features and bug fixes alongside other competing product requirements, how to allocate resources effectively for security testing and secure infrastructure, and the importance of integrating security throughout the entire development lifecycle, not just tacking it on at the end.
And why the emphasis on ongoing or continuous?
Because the landscape is constantly changing, the technology evolves rapidly, development practices change, new types of vulnerabilities are discovered all the time, new attack techniques emerge, and new regulations impacting security and privacy are frequently introduced. What was considered secure knowledge or a best practice even just a year ago might be outdated or insufficient today. Continuous learning, regular refreshers, and updates on the latest threats and defenses are absolutely essential to keep pace and maintain an effective security posture.
Makes sense. Beyond formal training sessions, how can organizations engage employees more broadly in security practices, making it feel like a shared responsibility rather than just another corporate mandate?
It's about embedding security into the day-to-day culture in practical, relatable ways. Regular security awareness campaigns that use real-world examples of breaches or security incidents relevant to IoT can help employees understand why it matters to them personally and professionally. Gamified training modules or security challenges can make learning more engaging and less like a chore. Running controlled phishing simulations helps employees recognize and report suspicious emails or messages, which are common attack vectors. Recognizing and rewarding employees who proactively identify potential security issues or act as security champions within their teams reinforces positive behavior. And crucially, establishing clear, easy-to-use, and genuinely non-punitive channels for employees to report potential security concerns they notice without fear of reprisal is vital. Frontline employees often spot anomalies or weaknesses that automated tools might miss.
Yeah, making it a collaborative effort, not a finger-pointing exercise when something goes wrong.
Exactly. And that collaborative spirit is central to the idea, mentioned in the source, of creating a cross-departmental security team, or at least fostering strong security collaboration across different teams. Why can't security just be confined to, say, the IT security department or maybe the core engineering team?
Because IoT security is inherently multidisciplinary. Designing a secure device involves hardware engineers, embedded software engineers, mobile app developers, cloud architects, and product managers working together. Deploying and managing it securely involves IT operations, network engineers, cloud security engineers, and potentially field technicians. Ensuring compliance involves legal counsel and privacy officers. If these teams operate in functional silos, vulnerabilities can easily fall through the cracks at the intersection points between their areas of responsibility. Hardware design decisions impact software security possibilities. Cloud architecture decisions impact device-level security requirements. Operational procedures impact the security posture of deployed devices. It's all interconnected.
So what are the tangible benefits of having this cross-functional collaboration on security?
You get a much more holistic and accurate understanding of the risks facing the product across its entire life cycle, from cradle to grave. Security requirements and solutions are better integrated into the product's design and operation from the very start, rather than being bolted on later when it's more difficult and expensive. Incident response becomes faster and more effective because teams with different areas of expertise, hardware forensics, software analysis, network traffic analysis, cloud logs, legal implications, are already communicating regularly and understand their respective roles in a coordinated response. It really helps ensure that security is considered not just as a technical checklist item, but as a fundamental business imperative, integrated into the entire value chain, fostering a shared sense of ownership and responsibility across the organization. Okay, we've covered the current challenges and best practices quite thoroughly based on our source material. Now let's look ahead to the future of IoT security solutions. As IoT technology itself continues to advance, security approaches obviously must evolve to match. What are some of the promising emerging technologies our source highlights as potential game changers for securing the next generation of connected devices?
It points to a few key areas: blockchain technology, the increasing use of secure hardware elements, and the evolving role of edge computing in security architectures.
Okay, blockchain. We often hear about it in the context of cryptocurrencies, obviously. But how could its core underlying technology contribute specifically to IoT security?
Well, blockchain's key relevant characteristics are its decentralized distributed ledger structure, which is designed to be immutable, meaning entries, once confirmed, are extremely difficult to alter, and transparent, at least for the ledger entries themselves, though not necessarily the underlying data they might point to. This can be applied to IoT security in several interesting ways. For instance, blockchain could potentially act as a highly secure, tamper-proof, and distributed registry for managing device identities and their associated public keys. This could provide a decentralized root of trust that isn't vulnerable to a single point of failure or attack like a traditional centralized PKI database might be.
Interesting. How else could it be used in this space?
It could be used to record secure transactions or data exchanges between devices in a verified and immutable way. This could be valuable in industrial IoT settings or complex supply chains where proving the trustworthiness and integrity of data exchange between multiple parties is critical. It could also potentially help verify the integrity and authenticity of firmware updates. For example, updates could be digitally signed and their cryptographic hashes recorded on a blockchain. Devices could then query the blockchain to verify the legitimacy of an update before installing it, making it much harder for attackers to push malicious firmware. Essentially, it provides a mechanism for creating a shared, verifiable, and highly resilient record of critical security information or transactions within a distributed network without relying on a single central authority for trust.
That's a fascinating potential application for ensuring trust and integrity in decentralized systems. Okay, next up, secure hardware elements. What exactly are these? We touched on them briefly earlier.
Right. These are dedicated, specialized hardware components, often implemented as separate silicon chips or secure zones within a larger processor, designed specifically to perform security-sensitive functions in a highly protected, tamper-resistant environment. They typically have their own isolated processing capabilities, secure memory, and secure storage that is logically and often physically separate from the main general-purpose processor and operating system environment on the device.
Why are these generally considered stronger for security than just relying on software-based security measures?
Because software security is always potentially vulnerable if the underlying operating system or the main processor it runs on gets compromised. A sophisticated attacker who gains root-level access to the main OS can potentially bypass, disable, or modify purely software-based security measures, including potentially stealing cryptographic keys stored in regular memory or files. Secure hardware elements, on the other hand, are designed to provide a hardware-based root of trust, a secure anchor or foundation that the rest of the system's security can be built upon. They can securely store critical cryptographic keys, like the device's unique identity keys, within their protected boundary. They can perform sensitive cryptographic operations like signing or decryption internally without exposing the keys to the main processor. And they can often measure and verify the integrity of the software running on the main processor before it's allowed to boot, ensuring the system hasn't been tampered with. They are designed to resist not only software attacks, but also sophisticated physical tampering attempts and advanced side channel attacks that try to leak secrets through power consumption or timing variations.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Common examples include trusted platform modules, TPMs, which are found in many modern PCs and servers, or secure enclaves or secure processors embedded in mobile phones, like Apple's Secure Enclave or Google's Titan M chip. Increasingly, similar secure LMS or secure microcontroller units, MCUs, are being incorporated into more capable IoT devices or gateways. Even for very resource-constrained IoT devices, a dedicated, low-power, secure element chip can provide robust key storage and cryptographic acceleration that the main low-cost microcontroller might not be capable of performing securely or efficiently on its own.
So the idea is, even if the main software on the device is buggy or gets completely compromised by malware, the most critical secrets, like the device's fundamental identity keys, could still remain protected within that hardened hardware element.
That's precisely the goal, yes. The secure element acts as a strong, hardware-enforced barrier, protecting the most fundamental security assets and operations from the potentially less trusted and more vulnerable environment of the main application processor and its software.
Okay. And finally, the evolving role of edge computing in security. We often hear about edge computing primarily for benefits like processing data closer to the source to achieve lower latency for real-time applications. How does this distribution of processing power also enhance security?
That's right. While low latency is a major driver, edge computing, which involves performing data processing and some decision-making on gateways, servers, or compute nodes located closer to the IoT devices at the edge of the network, rather than sending everything back to a centralized cloud, can enhance security in several key ways. Centralizing all data processing and security enforcement purely in the cloud creates a single, high-value target for attackers. It also requires all device data, including potentially sensitive raw sensor readings or video feeds, to be transmitted over networks, increasing the exposure to eavesdropping or interception. Edge computing helps mitigate these issues.
How specifically does it help with security?
Firstly, it can significantly reduce the amount of sensitive data that needs to be sent over the network to the cloud. By processing, filtering, aggregating, or even anonymizing data locally at the edge node, only the necessary insights or summary data might need to be sent upstream. This inherently reduces the attack surface for data in transit and minimizes privacy risks associated with transmitting raw sensitive data. Secondly, edge nodes can enable faster, more localized threat detection and response. Instead of forwarding all device logs and network traffic back to a central cloud SIEM for analysis, an edge node can actively monitor the behavior of the devices connected within its local network segment. It can detect anomalies or suspicious communication patterns in near real time, right where they occur.
And potentially react locally as well.
Exactly. An intelligent edge node could potentially take immediate containment actions based on predefined policies, for example, isolating a device that suddenly starts behaving maliciously, blocking suspicious outbound traffic from its local domain, or alerting local administrators, often much faster than waiting for analysis and response commands from a distant cloud. This distributes the security intelligence and enforcement capabilities, making the overall system more resilient to attacks that might target the central cloud infrastructure or disrupt the network links connecting the edge to the cloud. It enables faster, more proximate reactions closer to the source of a potential incident.
Okay. Looking across these emerging technologies like blockchain, secure hardware, and edge computing, and considering the evolving threats and the best practices we've discussed, what are some predictions for the future of the IoT security landscape based on the source material?
Well, we can anticipate that security will become increasingly integrated directly into the device hardware itself, moving beyond just software solutions. This might be driven by market demand, but also potentially mandated by emerging regulations or industry standards, making devices inherently more resilient against fundamental compromises from the start. AI and machine learning will almost certainly become standard, indispensable tools for real-time behavioral threat detection and anomaly analysis across the vast and complex fleets of deployed IoT devices. The scale just demands it. Regulations governing data privacy and IoT security will likely continue to evolve, hopefully becoming more harmonized across different regions and placing an even greater onus on manufacturers and operators to demonstrate that they've built in robust privacy and security measures from the outset.
So continuous evolution, really.
Definitely. It will remain a continuous arms race between attackers finding new vulnerabilities and novel ways to exploit interconnected systems, and defenders developing new security techniques, architectures, and technologies. The future IoT security landscape will likely be deeply multi-layered, combining those hardware roots of trust, rigorous secure software development practices, more intelligent edge-based security processing for localized defense and data minimization, and sophisticated cloud-based intelligence for broader threat analysis, orchestration, and management. And through it all, the foundational challenge, as our source emphasizes, will remain building and maintaining verifiable trust throughout this incredibly complex, globally interconnected ecosystem.
Wow, that was a truly comprehensive deep dive. We've really pulled out the key insights from our source material on the future of IoT security. We journeyed from understanding the unique and evolving threat landscape, those DDoS botnets using our devices, man-in-the-middle attacks snooping on data, and outright device hijackings, all targeting the sheer scale and diversity of IoT.
Mhm. Then we shifted to the absolute necessity of building security in from day one, exploring how those secure design principles, robust protocols, strong encryption, secure APIs, and crucial processes like threat modeling really are the non-negotiable foundation for creating trustworthy devices.
We definitely grappled with the complexities of implementing device authentication at scale, comparing methods like digital certificates and token-based approaches, and really understanding the immense challenge of managing device identities securely throughout their potentially long lifespans.
Yeah, and we tackled that critical area of data privacy and compliance, unpacking the real-world implications of regulations like GDPR and CCPA, and highlighting privacy by design as the essential strategy for responsibly handling the vast amounts of sensitive data IoT devices collect, which is vital not just for legal compliance, but for actually earning and keeping user trust.
We also explored the operational reality, the need for constant vigilance with real-time threat detection, leveraging the power of AI and machine learning to spot those anomalies, and the critical importance of having a rapid, coordinated incident response plan ready, balancing automated speed with necessary human judgment.
And we didn't forget the human element. We emphasized that security isn't just a technical problem. Building that strong security culture, ensuring ongoing training for everyone involved, fostering genuine employee engagement in security practices, and creating truly cross-functional collaboration are foundational human elements for achieving real resilience.
And finally, we looked ahead, getting a glimpse into the future of IoT security solutions, exploring the exciting possibilities offered by emerging technologies like blockchain for identity and integrity, secure hardware elements providing those unbreakable roots of trust, and edge computing distributing security intelligence closer to the devices themselves.
Absolutely. The core takeaways from our source material seem undeniable. The threats are real, complex, and increasing. Best practices must be implemented rigorously across the entire device lifecycle, from concept to end of life. Compliance with regulations and having effective rapid response capabilities are simply non-negotiable table stakes now. Collaboration across internal teams and even across the industry is essential. And ongoing education for everyone involved is absolutely critical in this incredibly dynamic field. Ultimately, as the source stressed, the entire effort boils down to building and maintaining that fundamental verifiable trust that makes the entire promise of a connected world viable and sustainable.
And for you, listening to this, whether you're directly involved in developing these systems, managing them in your business, or simply navigating a home that's getting smarter and more connected every day, understanding these principles gives you the knowledge you need. Knowledge to assess risks more effectively, make more informed decisions about the devices and services you use or build, and generally engage with this connected world more safely and confidently.
Which leaves us with maybe one final thought to consider, building on everything we've discussed. As artificial intelligence takes on increasingly sophisticated roles within these connected systems, not just detecting threats, but potentially controlling device behavior, and as devices become more autonomous, making decisions based on complex data processed within secure hardware elements that might be inherently opaque to external inspection. How do we ensure not just the technical security of these increasingly intelligent and autonomous systems, but also maintain meaningful human oversight, establish clear lines of accountability, and preserve a fundamental level of human trust in systems that may increasingly operate in complex ways that are difficult for us, their users, and even their creators to fully verify or completely understand?